Hi, everybody. I'd like to just welcome everybody. We'll get started in a few minutes when Jen gives me permission that it's 7:03. But we are recording this, and if anybody wants to access it afterwards, that's lovely. Due to the fact that it's a webinar, all questions must go into the Q&A only. And any of us can see it, and Jen and Darlene will be collating the questions so we can get them to Dr. Rich. Chat is disabled for participants. And I just want to say that I tried a Chat GPT introduction for Dr. Rich. And instead of it was lovely and cheery and not quite true, but they said, affectionately known as the mediatrician, which I thought was a nice way of looking at it, considering that is the title you have given yourself. Um, and, but that's not the intro I'm using. That was my first experiment with Chat GPT. I figured I should be a little knowledgeable about it. Um, uh, he's going to also, Dr. Rich is also going to talk about his book, The Mediatrician's Guide, and we will have links to that in the chat. And we will there will be an exit ticket because we're trying to figure out what other kinds of training you'd like, or information you'd like, or programs you'd like. So that's what we're going to do. So just be aware, Dr. Rich is going to speak for about 45 minutes, and then he'll do questions and answers. But we can't do it directly, so please type them into the Q&A part. So my name's Abby Dean. I'm a social worker, public health background. I'm the director of prevention and intervention programs for the town of Brookline. I first met Michael when I interviewed him on my radio show about 15 years ago. And I followed his career and watched him keep up with all the changes in media. I think when we interviewed, it was like there was the beginning of maybe Facebook back then. And what I really have enjoyed following is his rational approach. He's not a fearmonger. There's a lot of fearmongers out there about how all of this is ruining our kids. Dr. Michael Rich is recognized globally for his acclaimed work as a pediatrician, child health researcher, and a children's media specialist. He's the founder and director of the Digital Wellness Lab, and he's also the founder and co-director of the Clinic for Interactive Media, which meets directly with families and kids who are in trouble with, who are struggling with some addiction issues with media, and helps them have healthy approaches to engaging with interactive media and technology. We never get to ask him about, he spent his first career as a filmmaker in Japan with Akira Kurosawa before transitioning to medicine. So therefore, he has a unique combination of experience and expertise in medicine and media. As the mediatrician, he recently released The Mediatrician's Guide, a joyful approach to raising healthy, smart, kind kids in a screen-saturated world, a science-backed approach to give parents the confidence they need to raise a child well and raise a well child in this digital age. He's done a lot of research. He's the recipient of numerous professional accolades, too many to mention here. He's presented at Davos and South by Southwest most recently. He's a pleasure to talk with, and we're looking forward to hearing what he has to say. Welcome, Dr. Rich.
Thank you, Abby, and thank you, Jen and Darlene, for giving me this opportunity. I am pleased to move up from South by Southwest to Davos to Brookline. So I think it's a privilege to speak to my own community, and also to make myself available to my own community going forward. And what I really want to talk to you about today is problematic interactive media use, and how do we understand whether this is a problem or it's the new normal? And I'll even challenge the concept of the new normal as we go forward. Um, but we've all seen the headlines. In fact, just this past week, a new book came out, The Anxious Generation, that basically claims that social media and smartphones have basically rewired our kids' brains so they're essentially anxious and depressed forever. Um, as a pediatrician, I am both a pragmatist in terms of wanting to deal with the way things are, not the way we think they should be, but also an optimist because I see time and again the amazing resilience of kids, even under really terrible circumstances, far more terrible than those presented by social media, for example. But I want to talk about what all of our kids are going through and to think about it in a very rational, research evidence-based way, in a way that allows us to help our kids grow up to be healthy, smart, and kind to each other. We have to recognize that our kids are basically growing up in a screen-saturated world. They are actively using screens for, on average, across the country, about 8.5 hours a day. When we ask teenagers in particular, how often they are online, 50% of them say they essentially are online on a near constant basis, including overnight. Um, so this is the world they live in. We have to recognize that this is not the new normal, because the new normal is basically going to be the old normal in 6 weeks, the way things are changing. I really call this the next normal, the normal in which they move seamlessly between the physical and the digital and back again. They're growing up in a physical digital ecosystem, a continuous ecosystem. 94% of teens report owning a smartphone now, and 84% check it at least hourly. Okay. But here's an interesting stat from that same study we did: 16% of teens check their phones more frequently than every 5 minutes. And that includes during the school day. Sorry to tell you that, Abby. This is a rapidly evolving and constantly changing ecosystem that offers the ability to be connected to anyone, anywhere, at any time. And that can be a phenomenal learning tool, a phenomenal tool for understanding the larger world we live in. But it also is a world full of dangerous alleys that they may go down. Interestingly, a lot of people sort of put this at the doorstep of the pandemic and the fact that so many people were forced online, kids were on remote schooling, that hours and hours of screen time were caught up in school. Interestingly, studies that were done during the pandemic showed there was only a 17% increase in screen media use during the pandemic. But we also found that 49%, almost half of parents, said that their arguments about children's screen use increased in both frequency and severity during the pandemic, in part because the parents also were at home trying to work, essentially competing for bandwidth with kids who were trying to go to school. And one of the really concerning things about that time was that the kids, and many kids, were underconnected, that they did not have the broadband connections that were capable of, really doing education well online, particularly in low SES communities. And in fact, in the Boston public schools, 26% of the students did not log on during the year of learning remotely, as I call it, the year of 2020, 2021. So we have to recognize that these young people are engaged in a constant often simultaneous interaction with both the online space and their real lives. 54% of teens say that it would be hard to give up social media. And for most kids, there is literally no boundary between the physical and the online world. They move seamlessly between them. Yet 40% of teens say they enjoy their online and their in-person interactions with others equally. And 80% of teens communicate online mostly or only with people they know IRL, in real life. So why is this so embraced by kids? Why is this so um, are they so fixated on it? Well, if we take a step back, we can recognize that interactive media online provide a really fertile environment for key tasks of adolescent development. First of all, they seek experience, and they are filling their library of experience vicariously by being able to essentially travel around the world to various places, experience different cultures, different languages, different points of view, different religions, but also some potentially very damaging and scary stuff. They are instantly exposed to whatever terror happens. In fact, on October 7th, when Hamas invaded Israel, um, there was an immediate concern that I actually responded to. I worked with some of the leaders of the tech companies, and I actually called the head of trust and safety for TikTok and said, we've got to shut down the feeds coming out of the Middle East because it's going to get weaponized on both sides. And to their credit, for all of the insults and the concerns people have about TikTok, to their credit, they actually did so. They then tuned up their artificial intelligence, their AI filters, to block out any images of guns, explosions, people doing harm to other people, blood, etc. But they also explained to us that what AI wasn't really up to doing well was intervening on hate speech. And so what they did is, in the matter of several days, set up a human moderation center, as they call it, in Dublin, Ireland, which is one of their headquarters, where they put an Israeli next to a Palestinian next to an Israeli to filter out this speech that's coming out of that area and block all of the stuff that is weaponized, that is building hatred and division. So these companies are capable of doing better, but we need to keep them on their game. We need to keep a watch on them because the metrics they've been using for success have been how many clicks, how many eyeballs, how many dollars, and not how it's affecting the users. And we need to help them develop a second bottom line, really, of the wellness of their users. So in addition to experience that kids are seeking, they're also seeking independence from authority figures, from parents, teachers, any authority figures. They're seeking their own identity, their own autonomy. They are also moving out of the sort of self-centeredness of childhood and becoming socially conscious, often in a very binary way. This is when they want to save the whales or deal with climate change or social injustice of various kinds. And the internet offers real opportunity to connect with like-minded people around the world. It also offers that independence they seek. And as they look outward from themselves, they are also building their individual identities. And one of the really great things about the internet has been for those kids who have historically been minority, have been marginalized in their communities because of race, because of religion, because of ethnic origin or national origin, or of their sexuality or gender identity, can find their community online, can find their people online, and can connect with them and be accepted. And finally, with these new identities that they build, they seek connection with each other. Facebook is now the largest nation on earth with over 3 billion unique users every month. think of the political and social power that that represents in both a positive and negative way. But we are realizing that we are reaching over many boundaries that historically divided us if we can actually implement this in ways that are productive and empathetic and compassionate and socially conscious. This can be a very good thing. But the reality is that for the most part, kids are using it as distraction, as entertainment. They are on average across the country using screen media actively for 8 hours and 39 minutes every day. And in many cases, they are using multiple screens simultaneously, watching TV while texting their friends, having multiple windows open on their laptop while they're doing homework and watching movies or chatting or uh, any number of things at the same time on separate windows, so that when the parent walks by behind them, they actually click off to that English paper or that math worksheet that they claim to have been working on the whole time. Kids, like all of us, suffer from FOMO, from the fear of missing out. But one of the things that tweens and teens actually suffer from as much or more is what we're calling faux blow, or fear of being left out. Fear that if they don't respond to that text in 17 seconds, that people will think they are ghosting them, that they don't care anymore. And they actually measure their self-worth against how many likes they get, how many reposts they get, and how quickly they get them. So one of the questions, of course, in this case is, can there be such a thing as too much media time? Now, we did surveys across the country several years ago now, where we asked kids how much time they were on various screens, and asked them a series of questions. But the first thing that really stuck out to us was when we averaged up how much time they were on cumulatively, when they measure um, the the time they're on each screen and added up together. And then we divided this national survey into um, light users, moderate users, and heavy users, divided it into thirds. And we looked at those thirds of the light users who were up to 3 hours of screen time a day. The heavy users were 16 hours or more per day. That means that they were on often multiple screens, but for many hours, including hours they might have and should have been asleep. We asked these kids 3 key questions. One is, do you get A's and B's or C's and below? Do you get in trouble a lot? And how contented are you with your life? And what struck us was that the kids who were the heavy users had twice the poor outcomes of the kids who were light users. 47% of the kids who were heavy users had fair to poor grades, while 23% had good grades, A's and B's. 33% said they got in trouble a lot, 16% said they did not. And 20% said they were discontented with their lives, and 10% said they were not. Now, I want to caution us that this is not necessarily causal. In other words, it is not the screen time necessarily that is making them discontented or giving them poor grades or whatever. What we did observe, though, is there seems to be a bidirectional relationship. And if you think about it with contentment, those kids who have a hard time making friends would spend more time online instead of trying to hang out with their friends. And the flip side of it is, if they're not out hanging out with friends, they don't make friends. And so these became mutually feeding, they became a bidirectional or cyclical relationship where the more time they spent in front of screens, the less time they had to make friends and the fewer friends they had. So one of the things that we have to think about, though, is what is going on with the tween and teen brain. Um, and what's really interesting about this stage of life is the remarkable increase uh, in sophistication and complexity of the brain in terms of the synapses that are formed between neurons. Um, we are born with essentially all the neurons we're ever going to get. And the process of brain development from birth right on through adulthood is the process of neurons connecting with each other through synapses, and those that are used heavily get reinforced and get strengthened and become more complex. Those that are less used are actually pruned away or broken to improve our signal to noise ratio. What is happening during adolescence is that the brain is finishing developing from back of the brain, where the visual cortex is, to the front of the brain, where the prefrontal cortex is. This is where executive functions lie. Things like impulse control, future thinking, cause and effect. And interestingly, the people that figured this out first was not the neuroscientists, but the car rental companies. The car rental companies discovered that their actuarial tables between the risk they take in renting a car and the potential profit they make from renting a car crossed at the age of about 25. And what we have found since in neuroscience is that the prefrontal cortex and executive functions really finish most of their development between mid to late 20s. And this is why, if you give the family car to the kid prom night and they wrap it around a tree and exasperated, you say, "What's the matter with you? Don't you have a brain?" The actual answer is not that part. That they are really not ready to make a lot of decisions that require impulse control, future thinking, cause and effect. And we shouldn't expect that of them. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't help them do the best they can with what they've got. A lot of people feel that this wasn't a problem. The use of screens wasn't a problem. And in fact, the level of anxiety and depression weren't a problem until the pandemic hit. The reality is that over the 30 years that I've been practicing medicine at Boston Children's Hospital, we've seen anxiety and depression rise and rise and rise, and the pandemic really only functioned as an accelerant and an amplifier of those effects. It was not the cause of these effects, nor is social media or smartphones the cause of these effects. What they do is that they make them more potent and make them work more quickly because they have them in their pockets all the time. That social media is constantly ramping up in terms of social comparison, compare and despair around, for example, body image among teen girls, where they are using social media in many ways, much the way that that the companies use social media, in the sense that they are marketing themselves to the world. They are showing everybody the great vacation they went on, or their new car, or their new outfit, or their hot new boyfriend. And yet others who come to the social media environment, particularly the visual social media like Instagram and Snapchat, look and see that everybody appears to be happier, more fulfilled, richer, et cetera, than they are. When they come to it knowing their limitations, knowing their weaknesses, knowing their fears. And one of the things that I have encouraged my patients and their families to do is to take a step back and use social media in ways that are as authentic as they can be. In other words, to talk about their true selves, to talk about what they like, what they don't like, what they fear, what they are involved in various ways. And if you think about it, the relationships that we have in life are not with people who are perfect, but with people whose limitations, whose foibles, whose weaknesses and concerns we know, and we love them anyway. And they do the same for us. The best relationships we have are ones that are tolerant and empathetic and actually allow us to complement and complete each other. And so one of my dreams is that if we can use social media to be true, to be authentic, that young people will be connecting with each other around the world, and it can actually be an instrument of peace, rather than one of division and othering. And there was some good news during the pandemic. While we did see that young people struggled in some ways with um, their social skills because they didn't have any other ways to interact other than Fortnite and Minecraft and Roblox. But in fact, many of the kids or the parents felt that the kids did better on things like reading and math and science. And what we think happened is that when they were in the virtual classroom where all the kids were little squares, like Hollywood squares on the screen, that there was a leveling and democratic effect. Whereas in a live classroom, often teachers are spending the majority of their time either with the kids who are really struggling or the kids who are really excelling, but that the kids in the middle have less time, less pedagogical time. And what happened with the Hollywood Squares was that it leveled the playing field, and those kids actually that represented the height of the bell curve, the majority of the class actually did better because there was more equity in the way that the pedagogical effort was distributed. So one of the big questions, of course, is what causes the negative effects of media use? And as Abby mentioned, I have been running with my colleague, Dr. Michael Tsapis, a psychiatrist, the Clinic for Interactive Media and Internet Disorders at Boston Children's Hospital for the last 6.5 years, well before the pandemic. And we've seen hundreds of kids. And we've really been trying to understand what is going on. Is there such a thing as addiction to the internet or to gaming, et cetera? And what we have found time and again is that it's the interactivity of games, of social media, of things like Quora and Reddit and YouTube that really engages and immerses the users so they actually lose track of time and place. They achieve a kind of flow state. And one of the things that we've done in our research that parallels the work we're doing, the clinical work we're doing at the hospital, is we have a study that's going on now in Canada and Australia with a goal toward having sites in each of the 6 populated continents, called the Growing Up Digital or GOOD study, GUD study. And one of the questions we asked of parents and of grandparents of teens and tweens is, are they distracted by these screens or are they addicted to them? Interestingly, 30% of parents in Canada felt that they themselves were addicted to technologies, especially with social media as the area of greatest dependence. Yet only 22% of them felt that their kids were addicted. When we asked the grandparents, 36% of them said, they're both addicted, no issues. So we really wanted to delve into this issue of addiction, which I must say is not a medical or biological term, but a social colloquial term that describes overuse of a pleasurable but unnecessary for life substance, whether it be alcohol or nicotine or cocaine or opioids, that causes physiologic changes that are measurable and reproducible, both when using and when withdrawing from use, that there's continued use despite negative consequences, and our therapeutic approach to it is abstinence. Abstain from it, because if it is not necessary for life and it is causing the level of problems, the only solution to it is to abstain from it. Now, let's look at what we are calling problematic interactive media use, because it's the interactivity, not the device, not the platform, not the operation, but the actual interactivity that is shared across gaming, social media, information binging, and even pornography, that is drawing these kids in. Interestingly, what we have here is overuse of now a necessary resource. They need to be capable, they need to be adept in the interactive media space to learn, to work in the future, to communicate, to entertain themselves. And that overuse is driven by, in every case we've seen of the hundreds so far, by underlying psychological disorders that range from attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which is much more prevalent in boys, um, social anxiety, more prevalent in girls, um, autism spectrum disorder, and depression are the large majority of the kids we're seeing, and that they are not made this way by using the screens, but they are coming to the screens to distract and soothe and comfort themselves. And in fact, in the case of, for example, kids with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, they are coming to gaming as a place of mastery for them. One of the things that is very interesting about attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is that for millennia, when we were hunter-gatherers and crawled out of the cave in the morning to seek our food and to avoid becoming someone else's food, a level of distractibility, of hypervigilance, was absolutely necessary to survive. It was a very adaptive skill. That skill got passed down generation after generation after generation, and then one generation was told to sit down, shut up, and listen to the teacher. We really see attention deficit hyperactivity disorder not as a pathology, but as a normal variant, and a normal variant that actually can be modified and helped with the use of stimulants. Many of us are, quote, addicted to our coffee, and that is a stimulant as well. But when we go back to problematic interactive media use writ large, uh, to both the gaming, to the social media, et cetera, we realize that it's driven by these psychological disorders. So it's really more of a set of symptoms than it is the diagnosis itself. But there is continued use, just like with substance use disorders, despite negative consequences. But our goal of therapy cannot be abstinence, but self-regulation. And in this way, we see PIMU, problematic interactive media use, as more akin to binge eating disorder, where you are overusing a necessary resource, food, to satisfy psychological needs. And the treatment for that is self-regulation. You don't stop eating or ask them to stop eating. You basically learn to regulate and eat well. Interestingly, this idea of what's going on is been in debate since the mid 1990s. And one of the characteristics that we see of this, which has gone under a number of names. In fact, we've looked through the literature and so far have 116 different titles for what people think is going on, depending on what they are studying. So everything from internet addiction to gaming disorder to smartphone addiction, et cetera. But what they share in characteristics is the continued loss of control, despite the negative consequences of dropping grades, losing sleep, sometimes either overweight or anorectic responses to what they're seeing online, that are driven by anxiety, impulsivity, and mood disorders. And what we have seen is that the trigger is not the device, as in the smartphone, or the platform, as in Snapchat or Instagram, et cetera, or the application, but the actual interactivity that gets them to this state where they are feeling that they're feeling better. They're in a flow state with gaming, et cetera. The problem is that what ends up happening is it results in an inability to regulate their use of interactive media that causes them to be impaired and to suffer in key aspects of their lives. Probably the most prevalent first complaint we have in terms of kids presenting with these issues is sleep, that they are staying up late at night, sometimes through the night, gaming or online, et cetera, for various reasons, and they can't get up in the morning or they can't get to school. Nutrition is affected in both ends of the spectrum, either because they are comparing to others who are always appearing to be thinner and more attractive, so they are restricting their intake, or because they're sitting in front of a screen for hours on end, often eating, overweight. Academic performance really suffers. Often homework doesn't get done, or it gets done and doesn't get turned in. Kids lose interest in school because the gaming environment is so much more exciting. They withdraw from social interactions with family and friends. Oftentimes, they will have holed up in their room. They don't come to dinner. They are often very likely to explode in anger and aggression when asked to stop, or when parents cut off the internet, for example. So their relationships are affected and their mental health is affected. Often, again, as I said, in terms of accelerating or amplifying effects of the anxiety and depression that may actually precede this. We see 4 major sort of presentations of PIMU. One is in video gaming, as I said, more prevalent among boys and very prevalent among those who are struggling with ADHD. Social media use, both in terms of amount of time, but in terms of how the time they spend really affects their self-image and their behavior. We see kids who get in trouble with pornography, who sort of go down the rabbit hole of believing that that's what sex is like, and ending up with real issues around their sexual development. And finally, what we call information binging, which is the endless YouTube videos, Reddit, Quora, et cetera, following threads of information. So what we are hoping to understand in terms of the things that go wrong, but also how we can live in this physical digital environment in ways that are healthy, is how can we achieve digital wellness? So the Digital Wellness Lab at Boston Children's Hospital seeks to understand the positive and negative effects of media use and to use them to empower wellness. Not wellness like happened 100 years ago, but wellness as it can exist in this new environment. And we define digital wellness as an intentional state of physical, mental, and social health that occurs with mindful engagement in the digital and natural environment. And I use the term environment as a singular rather than a plural because these are not separate environments. They're in this continuous digital physical environment. So what can we as parents, as citizens, as teachers do to help these kids move toward digital wellness? One of the things that we explore and talk about in the book that Abby mentioned, The Mediatrician's Guide, A Joyful Approach to Raising Healthy, Smart, Kind Kids in a Screen-Saturated World, is to pursue what we call the 3 M's. The first M is model the behavior you want to see in your kids. If you are staring at your smartphone, reading that all-important email from work while telling your kid to get off playing Grand Theft Auto or off social media, to them, that's the height of hypocrisy. We need to be the change we want to see in our kids, and we need to put our devices down and pay attention to them. In fact, one of the subversive things I often say to my adolescent patients at Children's is, when their parents are out of the room, I say, "What could your parents do better?" And almost invariably, the first thing out of their mouths is, "Pay more attention to me. Be more present in my life." And interestingly, the same parents of those same kids are saying, "My God, she never talks, he never acts, we never know what's going on." The parents don't think the kids want to be involved, and the kids think the parents don't want to be involved. So we have to actively model the media behavior we want to see in our kids, and remember that they listen to about 1% of what we say, but 100% of what we do. The second thing we need to do is to recognize that smartphones, social media, in fact, any connection with the internet, is not a toy or a treat to be awarded when kids get good grades or do something right, or basically want it because everybody else has it. But to understand that these are incredibly powerful tools. In fact, the smartphones that many kids as young as third or second grade have in their pockets are more than 1 million times more powerful than the computer that landed Apollo 11 on the moon. And 99+% of what's on there is distraction. So the question is, should they be in schools at all? Are they distracting from the key task at hand, which is learning? And are they actually undermining the kids' social emotional learning of finally being an individual and making your way in society? Is that a problem if dad or mom can bop in at any time during the day and ask if that kid's still picking on you in the playground, or how'd you do on that quiz, or do I need to intervene, or how? That these kids need to have the friction of learning how to get along as individuals in this space. So when they want one of these devices, the key question is, how will you use it? Why do you want it? And if the answer of why do you want it is everyone else has one, that is not treating it as a tool. That is treating it as a status symbol. And when they realize that what they need to do is figure out the functions that they need from that, and when you feel that they can be responsible about it and can use it with respect for themselves and others, then you sit down next to them, just as you're going to sit down in the front seat of a car with them when they learn to use another power tool, and help them learn. And that's why the second M is mentor. Mentors both teach the mentee and learn from the mentee. A lot of parents won't sit down and learn a video game or learn social media with their child because they feel their child knows it much better than they do. And indeed, the child does know how to be more adept in that environment. But what they don't have is the executive function of the prefrontal cortex to use good judgment in this. And so the parent, if they sit down next to the child and play Grand Theft Auto and finally figure out the 47 different moves it takes to steal a car, and they are the student of the child who is there because we want to understand what engages the child, what they're interested in. And when they turn to the child and say, "Okay, I finally figured out how to steal cars. Now let's talk a little bit about why we want to practice this over and over again." You're coming from a very different place, a place as more of a peer, more of a student to the child, as well as the teacher of the child. And you're coming from a place of seeking understanding and empathy rather than scolding them. The third M, and the one that parents and kids push back against the most, is monitor. Monitor their online behaviors. Monitor them by having their usernames and passwords. And parents say, "Oh my God, I don't have the time or the energy to monitor everything she or he does online." This is not the point. The kids say, I don't want my parents in there because their definition of privacy is so mom and dad can't see. They are unaware of and oblivious to the fact that the rest of the world can. So the fact that the parents can monitor at any time what the kid is doing actually changes the young person's activities. Actually, it changes their behavior. It is much like random drug testing in the workplace, where you don't know if you're going to be monitored, but you're going to behave as if you are. It also allows the parent to be present and parenting in the digital space as they are in physical space. And so this is really important so that the kids don't feel that when something strange, they come across something strange online, they have the parents as an ally and as a guide and as a teacher, not as an authoritarian who's going to get angry at them. One of the things that have been happening recently, unfortunately, across this country is something called sextortion, where usually young adolescent men, often the high achievers, receive a nude image of a teenage girl at night who asks them for a nude picture of themselves. They send it intrigued and then immediately get a response of, we're not really this girl. We're going to send this image to everybody on your address book unless you send us $500 or $1,000. The young person doesn't have the money. They panic. And in the space of the last couple years, at least 12 young people have died by suicide when the first image that was sent happened after their parents went to sleep and they were dead before their parents woke up for the next morning. We need to have open dialogue between parents and kids about what they are doing online. It can't be driven underground by being made immoral or bad. Now, the good thing about these 3 M's is if you can help them with this as you go along, they achieve mastery. The fourth M, they are able to use these tools effectively and productively as in the day, and also to know when they are not the best tool for the job and shut them down. And that can lead us to what I call the fifth M, and perhaps the most important one, which is making memories. I challenge you to remember something important that happened on screen in your childhood. What we remember are the special times when we, went on a hike with our parents, or we tried to make spaghetti and blew up the sauce all over the kitchen, or we had a dance party, or whatever happened. But these things that happen in real life are the things that really stick with us, that make memories. So ultimately, you have 5 M's to guide you: model, mentor, monitor, mastery, and make memories. And so in wrapping up, instead of developing what they used to call killer apps, we should be developing our killer bees. Those killer bees are: be mindful in our use of screens, be balanced in our use and our putting down of screens. And instead of trying to observe screen time limits, which I argue are obsolete because we can no longer measure screen time because of the way we use them now, but to actually have disciplined non-screen time in our lives. And here's a big one: be bored. Let's bring back boredom, because we now have the ability to never be bored because we pull out a smartphone and look at whatever meme or whatever thing is going on. But boredom is the crucible of creativity and imagination. Let's remember that 100 years ago, there was a very bored patent clerk in Switzerland who used to walk to work beside the river, looking at the eddies and swirls of the water, and come back and stamp a bunch of meaningless papers and come back home. And in the space of 1 year, wrote the 4 most critical papers of theoretical physics. Late in his life, when Einstein was asked, how did you come up with this without being in a lab, without being in a university? He said, it's because I was bored and my mind could travel through time and space. And the final one, particularly for parents, is be present. When you're with your child, put the screens away, be there. They are not going to be this old forever. Treasure these moments, be there for them, teach them to behave in ways that you want to see them behave, and model that for them. But just enjoy being with each other. And as Forrest Gump said, that's all I have to say about it. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Michael. We'd love to have some questions. I had one for you, so I want you to just reiterate it right now. Parents,
Okay.
parents, what should they be, what do you want them to be doing this evening about their kids?
Hugging them, talking to them, listening to them. I think that's the most important thing, and modeling for them interacting, as difficult and awkward as it might be, in real life with each other. I think we've fallen into a bad habit of believing that these tools of infinite connectivity actually improve or increase our connectedness, and they actually undermine our connectedness in the deep and meaningful and sustaining ways that we that really help us in our relationships with each other and with the world. They have a arm's lengthness to them. And so I often tell everybody, but particularly the kids I take care of, that when they're seeking to reach out to somebody, to always think about how they can upgrade by one. So if they were thinking of tweeting text, if they're thinking of texting call, better yet, video call, but best of all, get together in person. Kids back off from that and they text because, it's more plausible deniability of awkwardness or weirdness, then they're worried about that zit in their forehead, or, that they might laugh and, milk will come out of their nose if they're laughing while drinking milk or whatever, right? But those are the things that bind us together in our common humanity. So I'm always talking about upgrading by one and moving toward, as scary and awkward as it is, more closeness, more intimate interactions with people.
And okay, so what's the best app product plugin to facilitate the suggested monitoring?
Okay, here you go. Ask your kid. There is no app that will solve this problem for us, and there is no app that a kid can't hack around. It's about having an open dialogue with your kid about this stuff. And here's an interesting thing. People are very concerned about Finstas. Finstas are, quote, fake Instagram accounts that are not public, that are only shared with their closest friends. Interestingly, Finstas are actually more authentic and more true than their public-facing Instas. And so they're actually healthier, more authentic than the ones that are out there. So I often say that the best software for protecting your child online sits between your child's ears, right? It is teaching them to be critical thinkers, teaching them to seek the resources, to really understand and check resources. And this becomes even more crucial as we enter the age of Gen AI and deep fakes, where they have to check and really think about, does this make sense? Is this right for me? Is this healthy for others? And one of the things also I say is, for kids who are posting anything online, to observe the grandma rule, which is don't put anything online that you don't want grandma to see, because she can, right? And that helps them, because what they don't realize is that anything they put out there forms a digital footprint that goes far, goes fast, and is sticky, and is something that college admissions officers can see and do use in terms of college admissions, in terms of job applications, et cetera. So even though it's fun and edgy to pose with a beer can at a party when you're 14, that will stick around, and that will be part of what represents you to the world going forward. So I think it's really important to observe the grandma rule, because grandma is somebody we actually want to respect us. Our parents we could care less about, we're breaking the rules, but grandma we want to love us unconditionally and respect us.
Thank you. Another question is, this is it. How do learning environments where children feel judged or lonely socially relate to the levels of overuse of technology? It's about children wanting to be seen by their teachers as well, and I was wondering if there was a relationship between um, children feeling, I think, kind of shy or lonely or judged, so they therefore use more technology, or yet less.
Yeah. I think the problem is, that they're moving in the wrong direction, because actually if they feel shy, if they seek acceptance, if they seek to be seen and heard, the best way to do that is IRL, in real life, face to face. And so I think that we collectively as a society shy away from that we worry about it, and in our worry we are actually in some ways rejecting each other, that it is not reaching out in a genuine, authentic way by sort of hiding behind the screen. So I think it's really important, that all of us, both be courageous enough to be authentic and be real, but also be forgiving and compassionate enough to make the space for those who are inherently more shy, more introverted, to step into and feel more courageous and feel accepted and embraced there.
This is kind of like that kids have so many friends on social media. Is it better for um is it better for kids to have so many friends via social media? Is it better than being lonely?
Here's a really interesting thing. Those kids who have a lot of friends on social media are actually coming out to be more lonely than those kids who do not. And that's because we lost a lot when friend became a verb, right? That we friended people, right? And these are not friends that you can cry on the shoulder of at 3 in the morning, that you can depend on when things are tough. These are just collecting, scores really of how many friends there are. And in fact, I had a patient who I took care of. She actually went to Brookline High. I took care of her through her teenage years, and she went off to college, and her best friend went to a different college and had 967 friends on Facebook, and attempted suicide in her dorm room in her first semester by herself. And she was living a very different life than she was portraying herself as living on screen. And so I think that we have to really look at the term friend and give it more value and invest more in it than the number of friends we have on Facebook, for example.
What do you think schools should do?
Okay, now I'm going to say something really controversial right up front. I think schools should not have smartphones in them at all, not during class and not between class. And the reason I'm saying that is, first of all, there is nothing on that smartphone that helps promote the key learning task of the didactics that are taught in school. But the other piece of it, and I touched on this in my presentation a little bit, is that school is the first opportunity that young people have to establish their individuality. Who are they? Who do they like? Who do they not like? How do they negotiate this? How do they build a society, as an individual, not as, a member of their family? And if they have a smartphone in their pocket, and interestingly, it is mostly parents who want their kids to have a phone because they've been convinced by the wireless companies that the kids are safer if they have a phone in their pocket. And what ends up happening is what I call helicopter parenting on steroids. The parent is checking in, how did you do on that quiz? Or how, is this kid bothering you still, or whatever? And they never get the chance to figure out these things for themselves in society, as opposed to having Jiminy Cricket on their shoulder electronically, if you will. So I think that it's, I know it's very controversial, but it is something that has been enacted in France with great success. Academic performance has gone up.
UK as
Social,
well.
yes, exactly. And it's actually being proposed in Canada as well right now. And we're kind of behind the curve on that. But I think we, again, have to think about these as power tools. And is this the best tool for the job at hand?
So we have a parent wanting to know, how can you help your children and teens develop a stronger appreciation for the more creative digital experiences as opposed to the experiences they're having that offer immediate satisfaction, and what role can parents have in this?
Well, I mean, I think that there are a lot of excellent art teachers out there who teach them to create using these tools, to do graphic design, to create videos, etc. The reality is these kids are creating all the time online. Every time they post something, they are either putting text up or they're putting an image up, all of which is creating something, but they're not necessarily doing it with, a sort of structured creative approach, sort of thinking about what is the story I want to tell, what is the image I want to create, and what do I want people to do in response to that. So I think that these are important, powerful tools to learn to use well. And in fact, and I have an interesting story actually from my life as a filmmaker. In 1979, while I was in Japan shooting this film with Kurosawa, Francis Coppola came to the location, and I functioned as his translator for what's going on. And at breakfast one morning, he said, "We are moving toward technology where an 8-year-old girl from Ohio is going to be the next Mozart of cinema, because the technology will be that easy to use." And we're at that point now. We're at the point where people are shooting feature films on iPhones. And so I think we don't want to turn away from their immense creative work. But just like you can use paint and make a mess, or you can use paint and create a masterpiece, you can do exactly the same thing with a smartphone.
Thank you. Another question about what is your advice for helping kids managing access to iMessage and group text chats where peers are kind of messaging at all hours and engaging in cyberbullying and harassment?
Well, this is a couple of questions all wrapped up in
Oh,
it.
yes, it is.
First of all, um, this is why it's really important to treat these tools with respect when we introduce them to the kids. And we should, when we think they are responsible and respectful enough to themselves and others to use it, should talk very explicitly about what they are to use these tools for, when and where and how to use them, because it's not just the content, it's the context of use that matters, and explicitly what we are not to use them for. And remember that kids can get to hate sites, racist sites, pornography with 1 or 2 clicks. And so we need to be able to talk explicitly about them to the kids, and in such a way that the kids feel that they can come to us when they come across something that is upsetting and concerning, not something that they have to hide away from. So I think that's really, really important that you create open dialogue. Now, the other piece of it is what I called FOBLO, this fear of being left out business. And what's happening is that these kids are sleeping with the phones under their pillows on vibrate or whatever, so they can, answer and respond to that all important WTF at 3 a.m, right? And so I think that one of the things that I encourage the kids to do, and actually surprisingly, the kids embrace this, is I say, pick a time when you're with your parents, when you are offline, when you're going to just turn it all off, and tell all your friends that you're offline because you have the meanest, strictest parents on earth, right? So that they don't feel that they have an obligation to respond instantaneously to whatever is going on. And then the kids actually, surprisingly, the majority of them actually are relieved to be off the hook. Because there's nothing that's going to go on in the middle of the night that can't be dealt with tomorrow, right? So I think that this is really helpful, both in terms of the quantity of sleep they get, but the quality of the sleep they get.
Another thing, Jen has always talked about is there's this radical idea of alarm clocks that kids don't need to they use their phones to wake up, and therefore it's in their room. So
Right.
she's like, just buy your kid an alarm clock.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that'll
Go to
get rid of a
Walmart,
whole
go to
bunch of
Walmart
problems.
and spend $5 on an alarm clock, right? Because that's the answer that kids always get you. It's how I wake up in the morning. I think that's important. I do want to, someone says, what do you want to say to us all with a generation of kids addicted to screens? I hope I answered the question that addiction is not a good model for this, that this is actually their response to and their attempt to comfort themselves in that space, and that addiction is something we treat by shutting them off, by stopping the alcohol, stopping the nicotine, etc. And we can't stop them from this. We have to help them learn to use it mindfully and effectively.
Thank you. Let me think.
There's a question in the Q&A about Over Yonder.
About Yonder. Do you know Yonder?
Yonder?
It's a
Yes, it is. What it is a pouch that the kids walk into the school in the morning, lock it in the pouch, and don't get it until they leave the school at the end of the day. Now, except for the travel from home to school and back again, that doesn't give them use of the phone for the day, right? So in some ways, wouldn't it be just easier to leave the phone at home?
good luck.
Yeah, no, exactly. But see, we've set we've never thought about this, so we haven't any expectations around it. And so now the kids, feel that they have sort of free use. But the reality is that, I'm hearing from teachers such as you, Abby, about the kids in their class who randomly smile at their knees during class, right? Because they've got the phone under the desk. And so I think that we've really got to think about in what ways these powerful tools help the task at hand in school and how much they either hinder or distract from it, as opposed to allowing these kids to be the best they can be in that environment.
There's somebody here who's looking for a very more specific limits, but also wants to know, what do you think about audiobooks? As is that have the same influence?
Well, as somebody who spent a week in a sound studio recording my own book, I'm all for them. No, I think that, look, there is a difference between reading, hearing an audiobook, listening to an audiobook, and reading the book itself, much akin to the difference between reading Hamlet and seeing it on the stage, right? They are two different ways of communicating that information. Some people are better audible learners, other people are better visual learners, and they decode those words into a meaning. Yet with the audible book, you get to hear the inflections of the voice, etc. Here's the interesting thing. I think that audible books are very different than, say, a video game or social media or whatever, because you are entering into a space and thinking about it, whether you're hearing it read to you or you're reading it yourself. I think that it really depends on how you best learn and how you best enjoy it. And frankly, if you've got a long commute every day, audible books are a great way of doing it, as opposed to, listening to AM radio and lots of ads.
Well, thank you, Michael. This has been wonderful. Let me I think we have pretty much everything. You and I will be in charge of getting phones out of schools.
And I should say actually that the Mediatrician's Guide, my book, is available at Brookline Booksmith. They wanted me to tell you that, but it's also available at Amazon as well.
And there's a link in the chat.
I did. I put the link to the Amazon link in the chat. But I'm glad
But
to hear it's a
Brookline
Booksmith.
Booksmith would appreciate your business too, and you can pick it right up there. And if you track me down, I'm around town. If you track me down through Abby, I'll be happy to inscribe and sign it for you.
That would be great. I think also Darlene is going to put a little survey in the chat if participants could fill that
That would
out.
be great. We'd love a little. So Michael, this was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for listening. And look, this is a project, we're a work in progress, right? We will always be a work in progress because this environment is always evolving. The one thing I also encourage parents to do is forget feeling guilty that we did it wrong. No, I mean, a lot of people do. A lot of parents that I talk to, the kids I take care of, feel terribly guilty. Dump the guilt. That's energy wasted. We are all imperfect. That doesn't mean we can't keep perfecting ourselves. And here's the other thing. Even my kid is not unsavable, right? And my kid shows up late or sometimes misses Abby's class altogether, I will confess, right up front. And the reality is that these kids are resilient. They will survive us. So let's not feel guilty. Let's not be punitive about this. Let's enjoy them because they're only going to be young ones. And let's really enjoy them and teach them to enjoy us and time together, preferably without phones.
Okay, there's a people want to know where to get the audiobook, and that's Kindle.
Yeah, it's available on Kindle and Audible, all at Amazon. All 3 versions are available.
And somebody wants to know, how do you the adolescent question of all time, which is, why do you need to know? How do you respond to that?
Why do you need to know what they're doing?
Yep.
I'll bounce that right back to them. Do you want to know if they're using drugs? Do you want to know if they're having sex? Do you want to know if they're beating each other up or
So do you
being
want,
beat up?
so is that what you tell your kid when they say, why do you need to know?
Oh, I tell them straight up front, but then, they know my kid knows I'm a doctor and I will describe in graphic detail what I see. But I think that we have to help these kids learn to take care of themselves and each other in a world that is becoming ever more intrusive and ever more mean if we don't turn that around and are learning to be kind to each other, which is part of this, what the subtitle of the book is about. It's not just about being healthy and smart. It's about being kind as well. Oh, there we go. Oh, I'm so glad at least one person has bought the book.
It did make me think that in the question about using being on digital things and using it creatively, that is how the cover of this book was created, which is a bunch of selfies that I guess Patience gave you. Is that right?
Yeah, well, yes, the original cover that the publisher suggested was of a clearly affluent white teenage girl in a beanbag chair smiling at her tablet. And I said, this is not what this book is about. Let me try to redesign a cover. And that beautiful child of unclear gender, unclear race and ethnicity, looking up at us for advice, is actually made up of over 600 selfies of kids. It's a photo mosaic. And it's really a visual metaphor for what the book is about, which is that we are all kind of an amalgam of the people we've touched and been touched by and the experiences we've had. And to recognize that, and that we have choices in who we see, who we listen to, who we spend time with, and that we should be open and kind and not othering each other, but embracing each other.
Thank you, Michael. Dr.
Thank
Rich.
you for listening.
Okay, so people fill out the forms, and it's a wrap.
Yes, and if you see me around town, wave to me. I really am. I really am around town all the time. Abby has to deal with me. Take care, all. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All
Bye.
right. Be well.